Have you ever wondered why Allah allows a sincere heart to lose what it loves most, only to lead that broken soul through unanswered prayers toward a destiny written long before pain, patience, and silent tears ever touched their life? Loss has a way of arriving quietly, like dusk settling over a familiar road. It does not announce itself. It simply changes the light. One day, life feels certain, predictable, and gently held together by hope. And the next, something precious slips away, leaving the heart confused, heavy, and searching for meaning where none seems visible. This is not the story of a perfect man, nor of a sudden miracle. It is the story of an ordinary soul tested in an extraordinary way. A man who believed he was walking toward stability, only to discover that what he was holding on to was never meant to remain. When that loss came, it did not only take away what he loved. It shook his trust, his plans, and his understanding of why Allah allows good hearts to feel such deep pain. In the quiet moments that followed, questions grew louder than comfort. Why this way? Why would the Rubb of Mercy allow effort to end in emptiness? Every night felt longer. Every morning felt heavier. And every dua carried the weight of unanswered hopes. Yet within that silence, something unseen was already moving. Not rushing. Not revealing itself, but unfolding according to a decree written long before this heartbreak ever reached him. What he believed was punishment was, in truth, protection. What felt like rejection was redirection. And what appeared to be delay was divine timing shaping a future he could not yet imagine. This story invites you to sit with that pain, to walk through uncertainty without easy answers, and to reflect on a truth we often forget. Sometimes Allah removes what the heart clings to, not to break us, but to guide us toward a rizq we never thought to ask for, and a contentment that only patience can unlock. He lived a life that looked steady from the outside. Not perfect, not overflowing with ease, but balanced enough to believe that effort would eventually lead to peace. His days followed a rhythm shaped by responsibility. Morning light through a small window. The familiar sounds of a modest neighborhood waking up. Work that demanded patience more than passion. And evenings spent with quiet dreams of a future that felt close enough to touch. He had built his hopes carefully. Not on greed or excess, but on sincerity. He believed that if intentions were clean and effort was honest, Allah would place barakah in the outcome. He trusted that the Rubb who sees every unseen struggle would never let sincere striving go unnoticed. This belief carried him through long hours, silent sacrifices, and choices that often placed duty above desire. There was one hope he guarded more closely than the rest. A future he imagined as stability, emotional, spiritual, and worldly. It was not a fantasy built on illusion, but a vision shaped by patience and prayer. He believed it was written for him because it felt earned, because it felt right, because every step toward it seemed to align naturally, without resistance. But sometimes, the most dangerous assumption the heart makes is believing that ease is confirmation. The first signs of loss did not arrive dramatically. They came as small disruptions, subtle delays, unanswered calls, conversations that no longer carried warmth. He told himself it was temporary. He reminded his heart to practice patience. He whispered dua into the quiet corners of his room, trusting that clarity would come with time. Yet time did not soften the uncertainty. It sharpened it. Days turned into weeks, and the distance grew heavier. What was once secure began to feel fragile. And then, without warning, the loss became undeniable. The future he had prepared for, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, collapsed without ceremony. No explanation that brought closure. No ending that felt fair. Just absence where certainty once lived. It was not only what he lost that hurt him. It was what the loss made him question. He questioned his judgment. He questioned his worth. And in his most vulnerable moments, he questioned whether his dua had ever been heard at all. Each unanswered prayer echoed louder than the last, pressing against a heart that was trying desperately not to harden. He did not rebel. He did not turn away. But something within him grew tired. He still woke before dawn, still fulfilled his responsibilities, still carried himself with restraint. But inside, he felt hollow, like a traveler walking with no destination in sight. The joy he once found in small things faded into routine. Even worship felt heavier, not because faith had weakened, but because hope felt bruised. At night, his thoughts returned to the same questions. Why would Allah allow something that felt so right to be taken away? Why would effort end in loss? Why would the Rubb of wisdom lead him so far down a path only to close it completely? Yet even in this confusion, something remarkable remained. He never stopped turning back. In moments when frustration peaked, he lowered his head and whispered, "Ya Allah." Not with confidence, but with honesty. He admitted his fear, his disappointment, his exhaustion. He did not demand answers. He only asked for strength to carry what he did not understand. Life around him moved forward, indifferent to his inner struggle. People spoke of opportunities, celebrations, and progress. He listened politely, smiling when required, while feeling left behind by a world that seemed to reward everyone except him. Comparison crept into his thoughts, uninvited and unwelcome. Why them and not me? Why now and not later? Why ease for others and difficulty for me? These thoughts frightened him, not because they existed, but because they lingered. He reminded himself that Rizq was not limited to wealth or success. He had learned that lesson long ago. Rizq included peace, direction, protection, and timing. Still, knowing a truth and feeling it are not always the same. His heart knew Allah's decree was perfect, but his pain struggled to align with that certainty. Then came a period of stillness. No new opportunities, no sudden relief, no visible signs of change, just quiet endurance. This stillness tested him more than the loss itself, because when pain is active, the heart stays alert. But when pain becomes familiar, it risks becoming permanent. He fought against that numbness by anchoring himself to routine, prayer, work, silence, reflection. Slowly, without realizing it, he began to change. Not outwardly, inwardly. He stopped forcing timelines, stopped replaying what is, stopped begging for what had already been taken. Instead, his dua shifted. He no longer asked for restoration of the past. He asked for alignment with what was written next. "Ya Rubb," he whispered one night, voice barely steady, "if this loss is protection, help me accept it. And if it is preparation, help me endure it." That was the moment something subtle shifted, not in his circumstances, but in his surrender. He began to notice things he had ignored before, opportunities he would have dismissed as insignificant, conversations that carried lessons rather than comfort, solitude that no longer felt like punishment, but refinement. His heart, once focused on holding on, began learning how to let go without bitterness. This did not erase the pain, but it gave it purpose. He understood now that not every delay is denial. Not every loss is failure. Some endings exist only to redirect the soul towards something safer, deeper, and more aligned with its true capacity. Unseen to him, the path ahead was already being prepared. The loss that had shattered his certainty was quietly reshaping his priorities, strengthening his reliance, softening his ego, teaching him that true contentment is not found in outcomes, but in trusting the one who controls them. And though he did not yet see what awaited him, the ground beneath his feet was slowly becoming firmer. Because when Allah removes something the heart clings to, it is often because holding on would have broken the soul far more than letting go ever could. This was only the beginning. The turning point did not arrive with celebration or sudden relief. It came quietly, almost unnoticed, during a season when his heart had learned to expect nothing. By then, the ache of loss had softened into something heavier than pain and deeper than sadness. It had become acceptance, though not the peaceful kind. It was the acceptance of someone who had stopped asking why, because asking no longer changed anything. He was no longer waiting for restoration. He was surviving with restraint. Days blended into one another. Responsibilities continued. Worship remained steady, though stripped of emotional comfort. He stood in prayer not because it soothed him, but because it grounded him. He whispered dua not with hope of immediate response, but with a fragile trust that the Rubb who hears silence would not abandon him in it. And then, without warning, his patience was tested again, but this time, differently. An opportunity appeared. Modest, unimpressive, easy to ignore. It did not promise recognition or immediate stability. In fact, it required humility. It asked him to step into unfamiliar territory, away from the identity he had built around his previous plans. It offered no guarantees, only responsibility. His first instinct was resistance. This was not what he had prayed for, not what he imagined as compensation for loss. It felt too small, too uncertain, too detached from the future he once envisioned. He almost dismissed it as another distraction, another delay that would lead nowhere. But something within him hesitated. He remembered the nights when he had asked Allah not for comfort, but for guidance. He remembered the moment his dua shifted from wanting what was lost to accepting whatever was written. And for the first time since his heartbreak, he did not ask whether this opportunity felt right. He asked whether ignoring it would mean rejecting growth. That question changed everything. He accepted cautiously, without expectations, without attaching his worth to the outcome. At first, nothing felt rewarding. The work was demanding, the learning curve steep, the sense of familiarity absent. There were moments when exhaustion tempted him to retreat into regret. Moments when he wondered if this path was merely another test of endurance, with no relief waiting at the end. But slowly, something unexpected happened. The space that had once been filled by loss began filling with purpose. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself with success, but the quiet kind, the kind that steadies the heart. He found himself present in ways he hadn't been before, listening more, rushing less, depending not on plans, but on principles. And through that presence, clarity emerged. He began to see what the loss had spared him from, the compromises he would have made, the environment that would have hardened parts of his heart, the distractions that would have pulled him away from himself and from Allah. The future he mourned was not evil, but it was not safe for who he was becoming. That realization unsettled him, because it meant the heartbreak was not random. It was intentional. The more he reflected, the clearer it became. The timing of the loss, the way doors closed without explanation, the unanswered prayers that once felt cruel now revealed themselves as boundaries, protection disguised as denial, redirection wrapped in pain. For the first time, he felt gratitude without relief. He did not feel happy, but he felt aligned. Then came the moment that shifted everything fully into view. An outcome unfolded, one he never imagined and never prayed for directly. It did not replace what he lost in form, but it exceeded it in impact. It provided stability without suffocation, growth without ego, peace without attachment. It aligned with his values, not just his desires. And most importantly, it arrived without anxiety. He realized then that the greatest sign of divine wisdom is not excitement, but tranquility, the absence of fear, the stillness that tells the soul, "You are where you are meant to be." The heartbreak that once defined him now felt distant, not erased, but redeemed. He saw how every step of uncertainty had refined his patience, how every unanswered night had strengthened his reliance, how every moment of restraint had protected him from arrogance when ease finally came. What stunned him most was this: had he received what he once begged for, he would not have recognized this blessing when it arrived. He would have been too distracted by comfort to notice growth, too attached to outcome to value alignment, too confident in himself to fully rely on the Rubb who had been guiding him all along. And in that realization, something within him broke open, not with grief, but with humility. He lowered his head one evening, not weighed down by sorrow, but filled with awe. "Ya Allah," he whispered, voice steady this time, "you knew what I needed long before I knew what I wanted." For the first time, he understood that true rizq is not what arrives quickly. It is what remains without regret, what strengthens faith instead of testing it, what brings contentment without demanding sacrifice of the soul. The loss he once labeled as his greatest failure revealed itself as his greatest protection. And the blessing he now held was not louder than the pain, but it was deeper, because it did not rest in what he gained. It rested in who he became. That was the moment Allah's mercy became visible, not as rescue from hardship, but as guidance through it. Not as removal of pain, but as meaning within it. And standing there, grounded and aware, he finally understood. Some blessings are hidden so deeply within loss that only those who endure with faith are allowed to uncover them. This was not the end of his journey, but it was the moment his heart stopped asking for proof and began trusting the Di-kree completely. With clarity came calm, not the fragile calm that depends on circumstances, but a steadiness rooted deep within the heart. Life did not suddenly become easy. Challenges still existed. Responsibilities remained. But the weight he once carried no longer pressed against his chest. It rested instead in his trust, secure, surrendered, and unafraid. He moved forward differently now, with intention rather than urgency, with gratitude rather than expectation. Each day felt less like a test and more like a gift carefully placed in his hands. He no longer measured progress by what he gained, but by what no longer disturbed his peace. What once felt like delay now revealed itself as preparation. He noticed how his reactions had changed. Situations that would have unsettled him before no longer demanded emotional energy. He listened more than he spoke, reflected more than he reacted. The pain that once dominated his inner world had transformed into discernment, a quiet awareness of what truly mattered. There were moments when memories resurfaced. Loss does not disappear simply because understanding arrives. But when those memories came, they no longer carried bitterness. They carried context. He could look back without longing, without resentment, and without self-blame. The past had become a lesson, not a wound. And in that space, gratitude grew naturally. Gratitude for protection he never recognized. Gratitude for unanswered prayers that redirected his steps. Gratitude for the Rubb who had answered not according to his urgency, but according to divine wisdom. He realized that if his earlier dua had been answered exactly as he demanded, he would have mistaken comfort for success and permanence for peace. The blessing he now lived with did not demand validation. It did not require constant reassurance. It simply fit. It aligned with his values, his faith, and his capacity. And that alignment brought a sense of contentment that no outcome had ever given him before. He understood now that Allah's mercy often arrives quietly. It does not always feel like rescue. Sometimes it feels like removal. Sometimes it feels like emptiness. Sometimes it feels like loss so heavy that the heart can barely carry it. But mercy is not measured by how quickly pain is removed. It is measured by what the pain prevents. The path he once mourned would have led him away from himself, away from reflection, away from reliance. The path he now walked, though slower, though less predictable, kept his heart anchored. It strengthened his relationship with the one who never left him, even when he felt abandoned by everything else. As time passed, others noticed the change. Not in his success, but in his presence. There was a calm in him that did not need explanation, a humility shaped by hardship, a confidence born not from control, but from surrender. He had learned that trust is not believing everything will go as planned. It is believing that even when it does not, the plan remains perfect. And so he carried forward, not as someone who had lost and recovered, but as someone who had lost and been refined. The heartbreak that once defined his darkest days had quietly become the doorway to his greatest blessing. And he walked through it with gratitude, aware at last that Allah had always been guiding him, long before the loss, during the pain, and beyond the moment he finally understood why. Every loss carries a message, but not every heart is patient enough to read it. We often believe that what hurts us must be bad, and what comforts us must be good. Yet life teaches, slowly, painfully, that this is not always true. Sometimes, the greatest harm lies in receiving what the heart desires before it is ready to carry it. The moral of this journey is simple, yet heavy with meaning. Trust does not mean understanding the plan. It means believing in the one who wrote it. When Allah removes something from your life, it is not always punishment. Often it is protection. Often it is redirection. Often it is mercy wrapped in silence. Unanswered prayers are not ignored prayers. They are delayed responses shaped by divine wisdom. The Rubb sees what we cannot. The future, the consequences, the unseen weight of certain blessings. What you lose today may be the very thing that saves your faith tomorrow. True rizq is not found only in what arrives, but in what leaves without destroying you. And true patience is not waiting without pain, but waiting without losing trust. So if your heart feels heavy tonight, remember this: Allah has not forgotten you. He is preparing you. And when the right blessing arrives, it will come with peace, not fear, not confusion, not regret. Dua. Ya Allah, grant our hearts patience when we do not understand, strength when we feel weak, and contentment with your decree. Accept our dua, forgive our doubts, and guide us to what is best for our faith and our future. Amin.